A surrogate for presidential candidate Joe Biden had to resign from a group called Pennsylvania Young Democrats. So now you hear her story of it. She says, well, it's because of the mean Bernie bros. Look at what you did. You made me have to resign from this group. However, Pennsylvania Young Democrats disagrees with that. And the whole thing started over a few mean tweets of hers and a doctored video. So now the woman in question is Lindy Lee, and she had previously served as the treasurer for the Pennsylvania Young Democrats, a position she has, in her words, been forced to resign because mean Bernie bros, right? Well, that's her public words. In private, she tells a different story. So now this was broken. The story was broken by Jamie Augustin, and who is an immigration paralegal. And she notes that Lindy's doctored video, which was edited to appear as though Bernie Sanders was praising communist leaders, has millions of views, right? Now, in the video, misleadingly titled, Bernie Sanders lavishes praise on communist Russia, preferring the Soviet Union to the American way of life. So understand that this is some deeply McCarthyite, red-baiting garbage, right? So now in the video, Sanders talks about how, it looks like Moscow's got some decent subway stations. Oh, and they've also got cultural and youth programs. Well, those are nice. I appreciate those. Well, as Bernie Sanders does, as he appreciates lots of those kinds of programs, public transportation and youth programs. Great. So now this was during a sister city visit back in 1983. So that's back when he was mayor of Burlington. And he went over to have his quote unquote honeymoon in Russia, which actually wasn't a honeymoon at all. It was actually a work trip. Now, nothing he said there was, of course, controversial. Wow. Subways and youth programs. You got him. You got him, Lindy. Congratulations. Totally shows how he prefers the Soviet way of life, except that it totally doesn't. Now, the editing came into play, of course, when she basically cut out the criticism of Soviet authoritarian communism. And so there's no context. When you look at the full video in context and not the edited one, you'll see that Bernie Sanders, while yes, praising some of the stuff that they do in Russia, is also very critical of Soviet authoritarian communism. And so doesn't at all prefer the Soviet way of life to America. But hey, look, Bernie once had, vodka, shirtless, who was caught shirtless drinking vodka with some Ruskies, so he must be a communist. Ridiculous. I don't even know where to start. I guess maybe with the facts, which is what Lindy doesn't have. Now, Bernie Sanders went to Russia with other government officials from Vermont as part of the Sister City program, as I mentioned before. That program involved spending time with regular Russians living under that system in that city. There are tapes. They're dreadfully boring, according to a Mother Jones reporter that had actually sat down and watched all of them. Now, relevant to the discussion, which was left out of this entire thing, Bernie Sanders talked about housing, right? And he talked about housing in America versus the Soviet Union. He said, quote, in America today, in general, the housing is better than in the Soviet Union. Well, that just blows away your argument. Now, he also talks about the candor of the Russian people that he had talked to. He said, quote, I went there expecting them to say, well, everything is great. There's no problem. But that certainly wasn't the case. They were proud of the fact, for example, that their healthcare system is free. But they would be open to acknowledge that it's probably 10 years behind the United States in terms of medical technology. So, for one, he's saying, I kind of expected them to lie to me about the system. No, but turns out they were honest about it. And they said, hey, look, we got free healthcare, but it is problematic. The United States definitely has better healthcare when it comes to technology. And that's consistent with Bernie's message is the healthcare is the greatest in the world, but only if you're rich. We need to make that universal for everybody so that we can catch up to the rest of the world. And so he also said the subways are nice. You got youth programs. And so there's some things that we could learn from doing these exchanges. Okay. Nuance, right? And that was the whole point of the trip, is to get some honest perspective about how people live. Now, whenever you're earnest, whenever you're honest, well, of course, that's going to get used against you, like in the case of Lindy Lee. Now, Jamie, through leaked screenshots, noted that Lindy had sent to a pro Biden group, found that the Biden campaign was well aware of this attempted smear. Augustin shared screenshots from several pages of the leaked group chat titled J Hive Biden Front. Great. There's a J Hive now. As if K Hive wasn't bad enough. Lee describes the context of her separation from the Young Democrats, says, I was forced to resign as treasurer of PA Young Dems because of my anti-Sanders tweets, some of which were very anti-Semitic, basically calling Bernie Sanders a fake Jew. Where have we heard that before? Oh, right, there's another guy on Twitter that said the same thing, that said that Bernie Sanders is an effing fake Jew. And so very anti-Semitic tweets as well. And she shared in them. Now she says, I was forced to resign because of my anti-Sanders tweets. No more fundraisers. Screw them. The Biden campaign is furious over this, Lee wrote in another series of group chat messages. I asked for my money back, so at least I'll be getting that. Now, the thing is, this smear was effective in the fact that mainstream media latched onto this. Journalist Jonathan Alter tweeted out this video, as well as Bill Kristol, Ana Navarro, and many other anti-Sanders conservatives, right? Now, the only person that caught on to this was CNN reporter, other than, of course, Bernie Sanders supporters, who obviously called this out. You had one mainstream journalist, CNN reporter Andrew Kaczynski. Now, he did some fact-checking on this and found that it was BS. He said one thing that would be helpful in discussing the nuances of his views on the Soviet Union and the international left would be a degree of literacy about them from commentators. For instance, he was always critical of authoritarianism in the Soviet Union. For instance, the video people are responding to is edited with a false caption to cut his comments on Soviet Union's deficiencies in healthcare and not being democratic, with the author of the tweet hiding replies linking to the full press conference. And by the way, I went and did my own checking, right? I'm surprised that I wasn't blocked. I'll probably be blocked after this. But I went and checked out her Twitter account, and guess what? She was doing exactly that. She was hiding replies and blocking people for just either making a comment with the correct video, with everything put in context, and anyone who disagreed with her. And so it's gross, it's deliberate, and unfortunately, it is in bad faith. Now, Alter, by the way, when called out, they deleted their original posts and offered apologies. Alter admitted this, quote, I didn't know the full tape was available. Having now watched all of Bernie's comments, many of which were aimed at boosting perestroika and a democratic society and launch of a sister city program, a fine idea, by the way, the overall presentation was a little puffy, but not so bad. Alter, of course, Navarro, and the rest are still massively against Bernie Sanders, but were forced, I think grudgingly, to apologize and backtrack. Mainstream journalists are so eager to attack Bernie Sanders that they didn't do the most rudimentary of fact checks. They couldn't see that it was an altered, edited video. So I give props to Kaczynski for actually doing his homework on this and saying, actually, you know, that video was edited, right? You might want to do some journalism, guys. So now the response to this from progressives, of course, is pretty aggressive, and it needs to be. Glenn Greenwald weighed in. He said, the same doctored video and blatantly false tweet that was spread vilely over the internet by people like Bill Kristol, Ana Navarro, and so many other GOP operatives and national security state officials, unlike Lindy Lee, they'll suffer no consequences for spreading this fraud. Chief among those boasting the Dr. Sanders videos was Dartmouth professor Brendan Nyhan. Now, Nyhan, ironically, once gave a speech entitled, Why People Believe Fake News, Myths, and Conspiracy Theories. Later on, of course, not really realizing the irony, Spread literal fake news. Hey, that's embarrassing. Nyhan walked it back once the video emerged, but insisted that Sanders was still politically vulnerable on the top of awful regimes. So, of course, like a non-apology apology. Now, later on, Yahoo News covered this, and their article is ridiculous because it paints Lindy Lee as a victim of Bernie bro bullying, right? Now, Lee told the newspaper, quote, "This is like the Bernie bro behavior in real life," referencing aggressive attacks online. "I wasn't always like this. They drove me to this." So, wait, we drove, like Bernie bros, right, which doesn't exist, drove Miss Lindy Lee to go and post edited videos of Bernie praising communists. Now, this is somebody who apparently or allegedly had liked Bernie Sanders before. No, it's your fault. You drove me away, and then you made me post anti-Semitic tweets and edited videos against Bernie Sanders. Now, look, I don't care if you don't like Bernie Sanders, right? If you have a problem with some of his policies, like, hey, I think that it's fine that 68,000 people a year die to the lack of health care, because I think if we have national health care, it'll be socialism, communism. I don't like that. All right, well, we're going to have a disagreement, but at least you're coming from a place of honesty, right? If you don't like him, be honest about why you don't like him, that you don't really want people to have health care, and that you think the system is fine the way it is. Okay, we're going to disagree, but it's fine. But going and taking things out of context and lying about your candidates, and lying about candidates that you don't like, spreading smears, doing misinformation, fake news, right? Well, that's where we should draw the line. But nonetheless, right, here's the original tweet. Bernie, who praised communist regimes and joined a socialist party that took Iran's side during the hostage crisis, is a grave risk to American democracy. Get at me, Bernie bros. Do what you do best. Excel in hate. I've reminded you that hate is not correcting someone, right? It just brings me back to The Office. Love that show. Where Steve Carell says, "I've been a victim of a hate crime." And Stanley points out, well, that's not what that is. That's not a hate crime. He says, well, I hated it. Well, that's exactly what she's doing. She posts misinformation and hatred against Bernie Sanders, and a lot of these people do the same thing. And then when we point it out, hey man, that's not cool, that's not correct, or that, that's wrong, and here's why. How dare you? How dare you hit me with the hate? Because they feel that being corrected is hatred. I think Anna Kasparian said something on debate coverage recently where she said that, hey, look, Bernie Sanders folks, they're like the Ashley guys. And that's true. We're like, well, actually, no, that's wrong. This is the truth. And nobody likes the Ashley guys. And to some people, pointing out facts is the same to them as hatred. Well, in that case, I welcome your hatred because we're not going to stop pointing out the facts. Now, one more here. Tweet from Lindy and her response. She says, "Sorry, nice try, Burner. Sorry you can't handle the truth about Bernie. Sorry you have to traffic in hate and intimidation." Yeah. All right. So now, let me go to the Young Democrats. Now, she claims that it was the Bernie bros that pushed her out, right? Those are the people that made her quit her job. Well, Mr. DeLuca, president of the Pennsylvania Young Democrats, actually shared a different side of why they asked for her resignation. He told the Philadelphia Inquirer many state Democratic Party officials had raised concerns over what was shared on Miss Lee's Twitter page. Again, as she is being somebody who is against Bernie Sanders, who is posting negative things about Bernie, right? Now, Mr. DeLuca said, Lindy is putting the pressure on herself. Certainly, she said she would rather resign than talk to me about her Twitter account. So it wasn't the bros that pushed her out. It was her that pushed her out. Her hatred, her anger. DeLuca said, quote, her resignation on Monday was at her own free will. Well, that's it. These people hate Bernie Sanders so much that they will do anything that they can to attack and hate and blame supporters for trying to correct her misinformation and hatred. These are bad faith actors. These are not good people, and they should be ignored and avoided. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.